You open your eyes not because an alarm clock woke you up, but simply because you've had enough sleep. No boss, no traffic, no endless group chats asking who's paying for the neighborhood gate this month. Just the morning, a campfire, the people around you, and one simple question. Are we going looking for food today, or can we finally relax for a while? And this is where things become uncomfortable for modern people. For most of human history, people lived without what we would call a job. There were no offices, no shifts, no salaries, no resumes, no mortgages, and no waiting for Friday to finally arrive. People didn't wake up to sell 8 hours of their lives. They woke up simply to live another day. And that difference is much bigger than it seems. Today we're going to explore what prehistoric people actually did all day. Did they spend every waking moment chasing mammoths with spears while dramatic music played in the background? Or did they just sit inside caves staring at the wall, waiting for someone to invent a comfortable couch? The truth is much stranger, much freer, and in some ways, much more frustrating for us than you might expect. And if you're already wondering how people without supermarkets may have had more free time than people with grocery delivery, washing machines, and coffee makers, make sure to like the video. The first thing we need to get rid of is the Hollywood version of prehistory. Ancient people didn't wake up every morning thinking, "Today I'm going to go on the greatest hunt of my life." Most hunter-gatherers lived lives that looked nothing like an action movie. Their lives followed a system. They knew the land. They knew the seasons. They knew where berries were growing, where edible roots could be found, where the herds were moving, and which places were better avoided either because predators lived there or because another tribe wasn't exactly in a friendly mood. Food didn't magically appear. It had to be found. But here's the important part. Finding food didn't necessarily take all day. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies discovered that many of them spent far less time gathering food than a typical modern full-time job. Sometimes just a few hours a day. Sometimes only a few days each week. Not because life was easy, but because it worked differently. There wasn't an endless to-do list constantly growing longer. If yesterday's hunt had been successful, today could suddenly become much more relaxed. Instead of rushing into the forest before sunrise, people repaired tools, prepared animal hides, wove baskets, fixed things around the camp, played with children, talked, or simply rested. And that word rested and didn't carry any guilt. Nobody had to explain that they were being productive, building a personal brand, or recovering to perform better tomorrow. They simply rested. Modern people have developed a strange habit. If we're doing nothing, it feels like we're wasting our lives. Even while lying on the couch, we feel like we should be watching an educational video, replying to messages, or worrying that someone else is already becoming successful while we're just staring into the refrigerator. Prehistoric people didn't have that problem. Nobody walked over asking, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years? 5 years from now?" They simply hoped to still be alive, have healthy teeth, stay close to their people, and preferably avoid getting bitten by a hungry hyena. Honestly, that's a pretty reasonable life plan. Morning usually began in a very simple way. People woke up together, not in separate bedrooms, not in tiny apartments overlooking construction sites, but in one shared living space where everyone could hear who was waking up, who was snoring, and who was adding another log to the fire. Keeping the fire alive was incredibly important. You couldn't just flip a switch or press a button. If the fire went out, starting a new one wasn't always easy, especially when everything was cold, wet, and everyone was watching you, silently hoping you actually knew what you were doing. Then came breakfast. Maybe leftover meat from yesterday's hunt. Maybe fish. Maybe nuts, roots, berries, or dried food stored from earlier. There were no perfectly arranged breakfasts made for Instagram. People simply ate whatever food they had. But that doesn't mean their diet was boring. Hunter-gatherers often ate an incredible variety of foods. Hundreds of different plants, different animals, seasonal fruits, roots, nuts. Today, many people eat the same few meals over and over again, just packaged differently. After breakfast, everyone decided what needed to be done. Some people went gathering. Some checked traps. Some went hunting. Others stayed with the children. Some repaired tools. Some were experts at making stone spear points. Others knew medicinal plants better than anyone else. Someone always remembered where fresh water could be found during the previous season. In a small prehistoric group, almost everyone had something valuable to contribute. If you had useful skills, people respected you, and if you could tell stories that kept everyone listening until the very end, they respected you for that too. Because human communities weren't held together by calories alone. They were held together by relationships. Hunting wasn't a daily battle with a mammoth. Sometimes it meant tracking animals for hours. Sometimes waiting in complete silence. Sometimes surrounding a herd together. And sometimes it meant simply being patient. A good hunter had to read footprints, understand the wind, watch animal behavior, and avoid making careless mistakes. A hunter wasn't just a strong person with a spear. They were an observer, someone who understood nature better than the animals understood them. Humans have one remarkable advantage. We're not the fastest creatures on Earth. Compared to most animals, we're actually pretty slow. But we can keep moving, keep running, keep sweating, and avoid overheating much longer than many other species. In hot climates, that became one of our greatest survival advantages. Not by catching prey in a sprint, but by wearing it down over hours. It isn't glamorous, but it works. Sometimes nature rewards persistence more than speed. Gathering plants wasn't just a relaxing walk through the woods with a basket. People had to know exactly what was safe to eat, what was poisonous, what could be eaten raw, what needed to be cooked, and what should never be touched unless you wanted a very miserable evening. Women, older people, teenagers, and children all helped gather food. In many cases, gathered plants provided the most reliable part of the group's diet. Movies love showing heroes hunting giant animals, but survival often depended just as much on the people who knew where to find the right routes. That's one reason older people were so important. Today, elderly people are sometimes treated as if they've become unnecessary. In prehistoric communities, they were living libraries. They remembered droughts, hard winters, dangerous places, animal migrations, medicinal plants, conflicts with neighboring tribes, and the stories that taught younger generations how to stay alive. Their memory could save the entire group. When food had been collected, another kind of work began. Not office work, real work. Meat had to be prepared. Some of it had to be dried. Clothes needed repairing. Ropes had to be twisted. Baskets had to be woven. Spears had to be made. Stone tools didn't simply appear. Creating a good one required skill, experience, and incredible precision. One wrong strike, and hours of work could be ruined. Even prehistoric craftsmen probably had moments when they looked at a broken tool and silently wished they could start over. Tools weren't only practical, many were also beautiful. And that's an important detail. People often spent extra time making objects more elegant than survival alone required. Why? Because humans have never been satisfied with surviving alone. We like making things beautiful. We like creating something we're proud of. Something that feels good in our hands. Something other people admire. Respect, status, and pride all existed long before cities. Honestly, that hasn't changed very much. Today people show off expensive gadgets. Thousands of years ago, they showed off perfectly crafted spear points. Archaeologists have discovered beads, shell necklaces, pendants, colored pigments, and countless decorative objects. That tells us something important. People didn't spend every minute trying not to die. They also spent time expressing themselves, showing their identity, their family, their group, their age, their place in society. Some traveled great distances just to collect beautiful shells. Others carefully drilled tiny holes through them. Others turned them into jewelry. Why? Because people have always wanted beauty. They've always wanted meaning. They've always wanted to look into a reflection and think, I look pretty good today. Art challenges the idea that prehistoric life was only about survival. If people painted deep inside caves, carved small statues, decorated clothing, or made musical instruments, then they clearly had something beyond survival. They had imagination. Someone who paints a lion on the wall of a cave isn't doing it because they need to complete another task before sunset. They're doing it because an idea exists inside their mind, and it needs to come out. Music also appeared incredibly early. Bone flutes, simple drums, rhythms, clapping, voices. Imagine a cold evening around the fire. Darkness surrounds the camp. Someone begins tapping a rhythm. Another person joins in. Children stop and listen. Adults smile. At that moment, they're no longer just a group of people who found food. They're creating something together. No speakers. No streaming service. No algorithm deciding what plays next. Just sound, fire, people, and the simple desire to be together. During the day, most conversations were practical. Where did you see tracks? Where's the nearest water? Who spotted the herd? Why did someone take the biggest piece of meat again? But once evening arrived, the conversations changed. Stories filled the campfire. Stories about ancestors, animals, spirits, great hunts, dangerous places, funny mistakes, old rivalries. Stories weren't just entertainment. They preserved knowledge. They taught lessons. They explained the world. They connected one generation to the next. And in many ways, they were the prehistoric version of books, movies, and family traditions all at once. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, how many hours do you honestly think you could go without your phone? Be honest. Most of us probably wouldn't even make it until lunchtime. Children didn't grow up separated from adults in rooms filled with expensive educational toys. They grew up inside the group. They watched adults make tools, copied what they saw, played, made mistakes, and learned by doing. Play wasn't separate from education. It was education. Small spears, tiny baskets, pretend hunting, running games, wrestling. Children became part of the community naturally. Nobody gathered them for a lecture called Introduction to Prehistoric Economics. They simply lived the life they were learning. Even doing nothing had a purpose. Yes, doing absolutely nothing. Sitting quietly, watching the fire, playing with a stick, talking, laughing, or simply thinking. Modern culture often makes us believe that if we're not producing something, we're wasting time. But the human brain needs empty space. Many of our best ideas don't appear while we're desperately trying to be productive. They appear when we're simply sitting, watching smoke drift into the sky. Maybe a large part of human culture was born during moments exactly like these. Moments that today are constantly interrupted by notifications. Of course, prehistoric life wasn't a paradise. There were diseases, injuries, famine, dangerous childbirth, predators, cold winters, parasites, and absolutely no dentists. If you had a terrible toothache, there wasn't an appointment waiting for you next Thursday. You simply hoped the pain would eventually stop. Life wasn't easy. It was simply different. And perhaps the biggest difference was this. Work didn't define a person's identity. Someone wasn't just a hunter. They were also a parent, a storyteller, a craftsperson, a friend, a joker, an elder, many things at once. Then, everything began to change. Agriculture arrived. And this is where history takes a dramatic turn. Farming is often described as one of humanity's greatest achievements. And in many ways, it truly was. It produced more food, allowed villages to grow into towns, then cities, then kingdoms, roads, temples, governments, armies, and eventually, bureaucracy. But for the average person, the transition wasn't necessarily an improvement. Farmers worked incredibly hard. Fields had to be cleared, plowed, planted, weeded, protected, harvested, dried, stored. Then came droughts, storms, pests, or a failed harvest. A hunter-gatherer depended on nature, but usually had many different food sources. Early farmers often depended on just a few crops. If those crops failed, everything was at risk. Archaeologists have found that many early farming communities actually showed signs of poorer health than hunter-gatherers. More repetitive physical labor, worse teeth, more nutritional deficiencies, Grain could feed many people, but it also made diets less diverse. The population grew, and once populations became large, there was no easy way back. You simply couldn't feed everyone by hunting anymore. A new world appeared, a world of stored food, private property, borders, inheritance, rules, inequality, leaders, responsibilities. When food belonged to everyone, sharing came naturally. But once someone owned a large grain storage, new questions appeared. Who protects it? Who controls it? Who decides who gets access? And little by little, grain didn't just create bread. It helped create governments. Cities brought specialization. Potters, builders, merchants, doctors, writers. Innovation accelerated. Human civilization advanced faster than ever before. But another idea also appeared, that a person's time could be measured, scheduled, bought, sold, exchanged for money, status, or survival. Somewhere along the way, people stopped asking, "What should I do today?" and started asking, "How many hours until my shift is over?" Now, this isn't an argument for returning to the Stone Age. Nobody wants to give up antibiotics, hot showers, modern medicine, refrigerators, or the ability to order dinner after a long day. Modern life has saved countless lives. But perhaps we've also lost something. Slowness, community, the freedom to rest without guilt, the freedom to exist without constantly proving our value. Prehistoric people weren't lazy. They simply followed a different rhythm. When work was necessary, they worked. When they had to travel, they traveled. When they had to hunt, they hunted. When they had to repair tools, they repaired them. But when life allowed them to rest, they rested. Not because they lacked ambition, but because life wasn't designed as an endless race. Nobody expected them to start another project immediately after a successful hunt. And maybe that's the strangest thought of all. We often imagine prehistoric people as poor because they owned very little. But perhaps, in one important way, they were richer than we are. They owned fewer possessions, but they also carried fewer worries. They had no productivity apps, no endless notifications, no alarm clocks. Morning began with sunlight, not a ringtone. When evening came, everyone gathered around the fire once again. Someone told a story. Someone laughed. Someone finished making jewelry. Someone quietly fell asleep. Children listened. Elders corrected the details. Because sometimes, remembering the story correctly could save someone's life. Beyond the fire, the world remained vast, dark, wild, and mysterious. And around that fire, people did something we still do today. They searched for meaning. We often believe progress means moving faster, doing more, achieving more. But the prehistoric day teaches a different lesson. People don't only need to survive. They need time to be human, time to talk, to create beautiful things that serve no practical purpose, to laugh together, to tell stories, to teach children through experience instead of lectures, to sit quietly, watch the fire, and simply think. Maybe when we dream about vacations, cabins in the woods, slow mornings without alarms, and peaceful days where nobody demands anything from us, we're not really dreaming about the future. Maybe we're remembering something much older, a rhythm that shaped humanity for tens of thousands of years. Prehistoric people weren't automatically happier than we are. Their lives were often incredibly difficult, but they understood one important truth. A day doesn't have to be completely full to be meaningful. Sometimes meaning appears in the empty spaces, between the hunt and dinner, between conversation and sleep, between the smoke of the fire and the silence of the night. So next time you feel guilty for sitting quietly and doing nothing, remember your ancestors. Maybe you're not being lazy. Maybe, for a few minutes, You're simply returning to the rhythm that humans followed for thousands of years, long before anyone invented timesheets and office schedules. And if you'd like to hear more stories about prehistoric life, ancient survival, and how humanity became what it is today, be sure to watch the next video on the channel. Thanks for watching.